I want to start with the play that set off all of the chaos. Everything else that we will talk about, there is one play that set off all of it, and it is this steal that Alyssa Thomas made on Naphessa Collier.
Chaos has erupted across the WNBA after Naphessa Collier's frightening injury collided with a storm of controversy that has now landed squarely on Commissioner Cathy Engelbart. What began as a heated debate over a late-game play quickly turned into league-wide crisis when media voices and fans pointed their fingers not just at the referees, but at Engelbart herself for allowing an environment where dangerous physicality goes unchecked.
The reason this was not called a foul is because they said it's incidental contact after the play on the ball. With that explanation, incidental contact could also be, oh, you're going up for a shot, I go to block you, I block it clean, I don't touch your arm, I don't touch your body or anything, but then I knee you in the stomach after I block it. That's also incidental contact because I jumped off of one leg and then I decided to knee you in the stomach after I blocked your shot.
Instead of calming the storm, her reaction only poured gasoline on the fire, with reports describing her private outrage and public defensiveness as a full-blown tantrum. For players and coaches, this wasn't about one foul or one game. It was about a pattern of silence, inaction, and dismissive leadership that many believe has been building all season. And the question hanging over the league now is simple. Can Engelbart restore credibility? Or has the damage already gone too far?
And that's the biggest problem that I have with all of this is so many people are fighting the fact that Alyssa Thomas, it didn't seem like she did it on purpose. It doesn't matter. If I hear one more person say, well, she didn't do it on purpose, it doesn't matter. For the most part, you guys, fouls across the board should never be on purpose.
Everything began with one decisive moment in the Minnesota Lynx versus Phoenix Mercury matchup. With the game hanging in the balance, Naphessa Collier was driving hard down the court, eyes locked on the basket. Then came Alyssa Thomas, sliding across her path to rip the ball loose. At first glance, it looked like a perfectly executed defensive play. A clean strip, quick transition, and an easy layup on the other end. The Mercury celebrated, the scoreboard tilted in their favor, and to the referees, it was business as usual. But for Collier and the Lynx, this was the beginning of a nightmare. Yes, Thomas got her hand on the ball first, but the angle of her body created a collision course. Collier was sprinting full speed in one direction, while Thomas barreled across her lane from the side. Their paths intersected at the worst possible moment. Collier's leg tangled against Thomas's frame, and in an instant, her stride was broken. She crumpled to the floor, clutching her ankle.
Alyssa Thomas is running across Fee. Fee's going this way, Alyssa Thomas is going this way. Fee is in full motion. You can even see, again, with this screenshot, the angle in which Fee's body is going. She is going full speed in one direction. She is running in one direction, and Alyssa Thomas cuts her off in that regard. The foul happens, in my opinion, after she tips the ball out.
The crowd fell silent. What looked like incidental contact at full speed now appeared in slow motion, like the kind of dangerous sequence that could alter a player's career. The officials didn't flinch. They deemed the play legal, labeling the aftermath as incidental contact. According to their explanation, Thomas made a legitimate play on the ball, and whatever happened afterward was just the natural chaos of basketball.
This was not ruled a foul, and I am dumbfounded by the amount of people online, even the amount of professionals online who are saying that this is no foul.
That ruling left fans and analysts stunned, because for anyone watching Collier's fall, it didn't look like an accident without consequence. It looked like negligence, and this is where the frustration boiled over. Incidental contact is supposed to apply when a defender challenges a shot, reaches for a loose ball, or makes a normal move without intending to collide. But what happens when the collision is unavoidable from the very start? Could Thomas have pulled off that steal without cutting across Collier's stride? That question split the basketball world down the middle. Some argued it was a brilliant defensive stop. Others saw it as reckless, dangerous, and a glaring example of the WNBA's officiating inconsistencies.
I don't care if Alyssa Thomas premeditated this foul 6 months ago, or she accidentally did it and called Naphessa Collier after the game and apologized to her and told her that it was an accident. It doesn't matter when it comes to calling a foul. It truly doesn't matter. So I'm also tired of the well, it's not a dirty, but it doesn't matter. Naphessa Collier had nowhere to go. I don't know what the referees thought she could do when she is running full speed. Her leg is in motion and her leg gets caught on Alyssa Thomas's body because Alyssa Thomas is bullying her way through Naphessa Collier's line.
For Collier, the timing could not have been worse. She's not just a star for the Lynx, she's one of the faces of the league, an MVP candidate, and a player whose health directly impacts postseason credibility. Seeing her limp off the court while officials shrugged off the play ignited a wave of outrage. It wasn't just about the injury, it was about the bigger picture.
The NBA referee's official account, they tweeted this. They said, "This is not a foul. Thomas legally gets to the ball and knocks the ball loose prior to any contact. The leg-to-leg contact is incidental once the ball is clearly loose. This was correctly judged in real time as a no call, as were the subsequent technical fouls." I'm floored by this.
If a top player like Collier isn't protected in the postseason, what does that say about league priorities? That's why the play became more than just a highlight or a missed call. It became a flashpoint. And while fans argued online, the fallout was only beginning. Because if the referee's decision set tempers ablaze, what came next turned the fire into an inferno.
What steps is the league taking to ensure the fair and consistent calls are being made throughout these high-stake playoff games?
Yeah, I think, Christina, I smiled when you started that question because I don't think it's just this year. I think every year, everybody complains about officiating, by the way, in every sport. So, but that means people care. They care so much. And we hear the concerns from the ecosystem in our league, whether it's fans, players, coaches. We take it seriously. We understand there's frustration. Our game is constantly evolving. We just talked about the speed, talent, and physicality, and we recognize that.
When the referees labeled the sequence as incidental contact, they likely thought they were following the book. After all, the rule itself states that not all contact should be considered a foul, and that players battling for the ball will inevitably bump into one another. But the controversy in this case came down to one critical question. Was Alyssa Thomas's steal truly unavoidable? Or did her angle of attack guarantee that Naphessa Collier would be taken out in the process? That difference is what separates a routine hustle, play, from a dangerous moment that changes the course of a season. Basketball fans know that contact is inevitable. Screens, drives, and fast breaks all carry the risk of collision. But referees are taught to judge whether a player could have made a play without endangering their opponent. On this play, Thomas reached cleanly, but her body's momentum cut directly across Collier's stride. Collier wasn't stationary. She was in full sprint, and once her leg clipped against Thomas's torso, there was nowhere else for her to go. The fall wasn't just incidental, it was practically built into the trajectory of the play. This is where the spirit of the rule comes into play. If the defender is in a position where they cannot make a play without crashing into the offensive player, then by definition, it ceases to be incidental. Fans pointed this out endlessly online, with some comparing it to a block attempt where a defender swats the ball, clean, but then lands with a knee in the shooter's chest. The ball may have been touched legally, but the aftermath is still illegal because of the reckless positioning. Intent doesn't excuse outcome, especially when injuries are involved. What infuriated many was how quickly the league dismissed those concerns. In slow motion, you could see Collier's body bend unnaturally as she hit the floor. Analysts replayed the clip frame by frame, showing how her ankle twisted under the weight of the entanglement. For a player of Collier's caliber, someone essential, not just to her team, but to the league's overall star power, this wasn't a small oversight. It was a glaring example of what happens when officiating refuses to account for player safety. And then came the perception problem. Imagine if this had happened to an NBA superstar. Fans on social media asked, would the league still call it incidental if it were LeBron James, Steph Curry, or Luka Doncic sprawled out on the hardwood? Would referees explain away their injuries as just part of the game? The overwhelming belief was no. And that comparison only deepened the sense of unfairness in how the WNBA enforces its rules. The point wasn't just about Thomas or Collier. It was about what kind of standard the league wanted to uphold. Should rules bend to justify missed calls, or should they protect the stars who carry the game forward? That's why outrage kept building. And while fans debated online, the next development pushed this controversy from a rulebook debate into a full-blown spectacle. Because once the NBA referee's official account weighed in, the conversation exploded. If the play itself had already divided fans, the firestorm reached an entirely new level when the NBA referee's official account decided to weigh in. In a rare move, the account publicly defended the call, declaring that Alyssa Thomas's steal was clean. The ball was dislodged legally, and that any contact afterward was incidental. To the referees, this was an open and shut case, the kind of moment that didn't even deserve a whistle. But to the wider basketball community, that statement landed like a grenade. The frustration wasn't only about what the referees said, but how they said it, by confidently declaring that the no call was correct. The league's own officiating body essentially told players, coaches, and fans that their eyes were lying to them. People saw Collier's ankle buckle, her body collapsing in pain. And yet the ruling suggested that none of it mattered because the ball had already been touched first. It felt dismissive, and worse, it felt like the referees were hiding behind technicalities. Instead of addressing the reality of player safety, this is where perception mattered most. The statement instantly raised the question: would this same explanation apply if the injured player were a global NBA superstar? If Steph Curry twisted his ankle after being undercut on a fast break, would fans be told it was incidental contact? If LeBron James was bulldozed out of his lane after a clean strip, would the league stand behind a no? The consensus among fans and media was clear. The rules would be enforced differently if the names were bigger, if the stakes were higher, and if the league couldn't afford to lose its stars. And that double standard fueled the outrage even further. It also exposed the fragile relationship between referees and credibility. Fans are used to controversial calls, but when an official account takes sides so firmly, it becomes a public relations nightmare. Instead of calming the storm, the referees added fuel to the fire. Every replay that circulated online now had a new caption. The referees think this isn't a foul. That single tweet-hardened positions pushed players and coaches to speak out and gave fans the sense that the system was rigged to protect officials rather than players. The timing only made things worse. This wasn't a meaningless regular season game. It was the postseason with championship implications. One of the league's brightest stars had just gone down, and instead of empathy or nuance, the response was to validate the very call that had so many outraged. For many, it symbolized everything wrong with WNBA officiating this season: inconsistency, defensiveness, and a lack of accountability. And the backlash wasn't just online chatter. On the court, one coach wasn't about to let the moment pass quietly. In fact, her response turned the simmering anger into a spectacle nobody could ignore. Because the referees may have defended their call, but Cheryl Reeve wasn't about to stay silent. Her eruption on the sideline took the controversy to a whole new level. When the referees doubled down on their no call, the Minnesota Lynx's fiery head coach, Cheryl Reeve, reached her breaking point. This wasn't a measured complaint or a routine argument over a whistle. This was an eruption that instantly became one of the most talked about moments of the WNBA season. As Alyssa Thomas ran the ball in for a layup, Reeve turned her fury directly toward the officials. Storming up the sideline with an intensity that stunned even seasoned viewers, she wasn't just angry, she was relentless, chasing down referees, pointing furiously, and making it clear that she considered the missed foul an outright injustice. Players and assistants scrambled to intervene. Naphessa Heedman tried to hold her back. Teammates stepped between Reeve and the officials, and even opposing players watched in shock as the usually composed coach lost all restraint. One moment in particular stood out. Dorka Yohush grabbed a towel and tried to shield Reeves's mouth from cameras, worried that her string of curses would draw even harsher punishment. The image of a coach being physically restrained by her own team was dramatic enough, but it symbolized the boiling frustration that had been building all season. Reeves' meltdown wasn't just about Collier's injury or one controversial play. It was the culmination of months of tension. Coaches around the league had been voicing their frustration with officiating inconsistencies. Players had spoken up about how physical the games had become. and fans had grown tired of watching stars go down without what they felt was adequate protection from the referees. Reeve's sideline explosion became a visual representation of all that bottled-up anger. The referees, of course, had no choice but to eject her. But even as security guided her out, Reeve didn't back down. She turned her frustration toward the crowd, exchanging heated words with fans on her way out of the arena. Cameras caught her shouting profanities, her voice breaking through the chaos of the moment. For many viewers, this was shocking. A head coach completely unhinged in front of a national audience. For others, it was cathartic. As if Reeve was voicing the collective outrage that so many around the league had been feeling for months. What made this outburst resonate even more was the fact that Reeve is no ordinary coach. She's one of the most respected figures in the league, a multiple-time champion and the leader of one of the most successful franchises in WNBA history. When someone with her track record and stature loses control like this, it forces people to take notice. This wasn't a rookie coach looking for attention. This was a seasoned veteran demanding accountability. Still, the optics were unavoidable. The league now faced a crisis. One of its star coaches had attacked referees, cursed out fans, and refused to let the issue die down. The question was no longer whether the no call was right or wrong. It was how the league would respond to one of its most visible leaders crossing the line so publicly. And if anyone thought Reeve's fury ended when she left the court, they were mistaken. Because the real storm came later, when she took her frustrations to the microphone in the post-game presser and called out the league's leadership by name. If Cheryl Reeve's sideline eruption was the spark, her post-game press conference was the explosion that rocked the entire league. By the time she sat down at the podium, Reeve had already been ejected, restrained by her own players and booed by opposing fans. Most expected her to cool off, or at least soften her tone in front of reporters. Instead, she doubled down, shifting the conversation from one foul to a full-scale indictment of WNBA leadership. With cameras rolling, Reeve didn't mince words. She began by warning about the dangers of unchecked physicality, pointing out that when referees allow defenders to bulldoze through players, injuries become inevitable. She cited examples from around the league: star players missing games, skirmishes breaking out, and coaches from other teams, including Becky Hammon, voicing the same frustrations. This wasn't just an isolated Lynx issue, she insisted. It was a league-wide problem that had been festering all season. Then came the line that set social media ablaze. "I want to call for a change of leadership at the league level when it comes to officiating. It's malpractice to have these referees working semifinal playoff games." The word malpractice wasn't accidental. It carried weight, suggesting not just incompetence, but negligence. To Reeve, the decision-makers who assigned those referees weren't simply doing a poor job. They were endangering players and undermining the integrity of the POST. CISO and clips of her rant went viral within hours. Fans and analysts latched onto her words, replaying the moment she explicitly called out league leadership. Some praised her courage, arguing that it takes a coach with her pedigree to demand accountability. Others criticized her, suggesting she crossed a line by attacking the very institution that employs her. But either way, the presser guaranteed that the spotlight would shift away from the game itself and onto the league's handling of officiating. Reeve didn't stop there. She pointed out that Collier, one of the WNBA's biggest stars and an MVP candidate, hadn't taken a single free throw that night, despite being constantly attacked in the paint. To her, this wasn't just bad luck or human error. It was evidence of a systemic problem where referees refused to protect star players. If Collier could be hacked and undercut without consequence, what did that say to other players about their safety? Her tirade also struck a chord because it echoed complaints from earlier in the season. Coaches and players had been calling out officiating inconsistencies for months, but few had gone as far as Reeve in challenging league authority. By pointing the finger at Cathy Engelbert's administration, Reeve escalated the issue from a referee problem to a leadership crisis. The implication was clear. The commissioner's failure to take a hard stance had trickled down into chaos on the court, and that's what made her words so explosive. This wasn't just frustration after a loss. It was a demand for systemic change. But while Reeve's presser resonated with many, it also created a bigger problem for Engelbert herself. Because now the commissioner wasn't just facing angry fans. she was facing open rebellion from one of her most decorated coaches. Cheryl Reeve's outburst might have been the loudest, but it wasn't the first. Earlier in the season, Becky Hammon had already issued a stark warning about what happens when referees let the game spiral into unchecked physicality. Having coached in both the NBA and WNBA, Hammon spoke with authority. She made it clear that if NBA referees allowed the same level of leeway as WNBA refs, the result wouldn't just be rough play. There would be fights every night, Hammon said bluntly, and her words now ring louder than ever. This wasn't hyperbole. The WNBA has built a reputation as a gritty, physical league, where defenders push the limits of contact and where officials often swallow the whistle. That identity has long been part of the league's appeal to hardcore fans who enjoy the toughness. But when physical starts crossing into reckless, the line between competitive edge and outright danger becomes blurry. Hammon's warning wasn't just about optics. It was about safety. And Naphessa Collier's ankle injury seemed to validate her point in the worst way possible. Players adapt to what the referees allow. If the whistle stays silent on body checks, hip bumps, and stride cuts, defenders will keep using them until it costs somebody their season. That's what critics argue happened in the Thomas Collier play. Thomas wasn't dirty, but she took advantage of a climate where aggressive defense is rarely punished, and Collier paid the price. Fans are left asking, is this the kind of basketball the league wants to promote? What makes the issue more pressing is the injury trend. This season has already seen stars sidelined due to contact-heavy plays. Every time a top player goes down, the league's credibility takes a hit. The WNBA is in the middle of a growth surge, drawing in new fans and media attention, largely thanks to its star power. But injuries to players like Collier threaten that momentum. New fans tuning in don't want to see all-stars limping off the floor because of preventable collisions. They want to see the league's best competing at the highest level. Hammon's perspective also highlights a cultural difference. In the NBA, officiating has tightened in recent years to prioritize freedom of movement and protect marquee players. That shift wasn't just about fairness, it was about protecting the league's investment in its stars. The WNBA, however, seems stuck in an old mindset, where toughness is celebrated even when it undermines the quality of play. Reeve's meltdown, Hammon's earlier warning, and Collier's injury all point to the same conclusion. The WNBA's current officiating culture is out of step with the league's ambitions. The bigger danger isn't just losing players to injury, it's losing trust. If fans and players believe the game is unsafe or unfair, they'll stop believing in the product, and that's a threat no commissioner can ignore. Which brings the focus squarely onto Cathy Engelbart. Because in moments like this, leadership isn't about excuses or technicalities. It's about taking responsibility, setting a standard, and proving the league values its players above all else. When the dust settled after Naphessa Collier's injury, all eyes turned to WNBA Commissioner Cathy Engelbart. This was her moment to show leadership, to steady the league amid chaos, and to reassure fans and players that safety and fairness were non-negotiable. Instead, her response left many feeling underwhelmed, if not outright betrayed. Engelbart's recent comments about officiating did little to calm frustrations. In interviews, she repeated the same refrain: every sport complains about officiating. To her, the backlash was simply proof that people care. That framing might sound diplomatic, but in this context, it felt dismissive. Fans weren't just venting about a missed travel call or a questionable block charge. They were watching an MVP candidate carried off the floor after what they believed was preventable contact. Comparing that to generic gripes about referees in other sports seemed tone-deaf, almost as if the commissioner didn't grasp the seriousness of the situation. Her defense of the league's officiating system also rang hollow. Engelbart pointed out the extensive training referees undergo, the evaluation process after every game, and the accountability structures already in place. But that raised another uncomfortable question. If the system is so thorough, why are playoff games still marred by inconsistency and controversy? If training is so rigorous, why did officials miss or choose to ignore a play that sidelined one of the league's brightest stars? The answers never came. What fans and insiders wanted wasn't a reminder of procedures. They wanted urgency. They wanted Engelbart to stand in front of microphones and say, "This isn't acceptable. We're taking immediate steps to fix it." Instead, her tone suggested patience and long-term evolution. In a league fighting to keep new fans engaged, patience doesn't sell. Action does. It also didn't help that Engelbert has a track record of being cautious in moments when boldness was needed. Earlier in the year, she allowed players to wear rival league merchandise during official events, downplaying the optics. To some, it looked like weakness. Now, with Cheryl Reeve cursing out fans, challenging referees, and publicly calling for leadership change, Engelbert once again seemed hesitant to enforce authority. Should Reeve be fined, suspended, or both? The longer Engelbert delayed a clear response, the more it looked like she was being pushed around by her own league. This is where perception matters. Fans don't just watch games, they follow narratives. And the current narrative paints Engelbert as soft, more concerned with protecting the image of the league than addressing the issues tearing it apart. That's a dangerous reputation for any commissioner, but especially in a league trying to prove its legitimacy to a growing audience. Now the stakes are higher than ever. Engelbert must decide whether to punish one of the league's most decorated coaches, address mounting officiating concerns, and restore confidence among players and fans. Anything less will be seen as a failure of leadership. And with the finals looming, her next move could determine not just the outcome of this controversy, but the direction of the league itself. By the time the dust cleared, it was obvious this wasn't just about one game or one controversial play. Naphessa Collier's injury became the symbol of something larger, a league at a crossroads, where officiating, leadership, and player safety are colliding in ways that threaten its credibility. And now, with the WNBA Finals looming, the fallout from this moment could shape how the league is remembered this season and beyond. The first concern is precedent. If a play like Alyssa Thomas's strip-band collision can be excused as incidental contact, what does that signal to players heading into the most high-stakes series of the year? It tells defenders they can push boundaries without fear of consequence. It tells offensive stars that their health may not be fully protected. And it tells fans that even the biggest names can be taken out of games without recourse. Once that perception sets in, it becomes incredibly difficult to shake. The second concern is perception outside the court. The WNBA has worked tirelessly to grow its audience, attract media attention, and showcase its stars to the wider sports world. But perception is fragile. Highlight reels should be filled with game-winning shots and championship celebrations, not viral clips of coaches cursing at refs and players limping to the locker room. If new fans tuning in see chaos instead of excellence, they may not stick around. And with the league in the middle of its biggest growth wave in years, that risk cannot be ignored. Then there's the finals themselves. The postseason is supposed to be the crown jewel of the WNBA calendar, the moment where stars shine brightest and the league puts its best product on display. But if the finals are overshadowed by officiating controversies or more injuries to top players, the narrative shifts from triumph to turmoil. That's the nightmare scenario for Cathy Engelbert and league leadership. That instead of celebrating the progress of the sport, fans leave the season questioning its integrity. There's also a broader cultural implication. For years, the WNBA has prided itself on toughness, resilience, and physical play. But as the league grows, those values have to be balanced with accountability and safety. The NBA learned this years ago, tightening its officiating to protect stars and maximize entertainment. If the WNBA fails to adapt, it risks being defined not by its rising stars, but by the injuries and controversies that cut them down. This is why the Collier incident, Cheryl Reeve's eruption, and Engelbert's hesitant response feel so monumental. They're not isolated moments. They're threads in a larger story about what kind of league the WNBA wants to be. Will it embrace change and prioritize the health of its stars, or will it cling to outdated standards that leave players vulnerable and fans disillusioned? One thing is certain, the finals won't just determine a champion. They'll also determine whether the WNBA can weather this storm or weather the cracks. Exposed in this controversy, widen into a full-blown crisis. And that's a battle Cathy Engelbert cannot afford to lose. What started as one late-game steal has spiraled into a defining moment for the WNBA. The referee's dismissal, Cheryl Reeve's eruption, and Cathy Engelbert's hesitant response have all combined into a storyline that stretches far beyond basketball. This isn't just about a foul that wasn't called. It's about the safety of stars, the credibility of officials, and the strength of league leadership at a time when every spotlight is on women's basketball. For Engelbert, the choice is clear: either step forward with decisive action or allow doubt and frustration to erode the league's biggest growth moment in years. Fans don't want excuses, they want accountability. Players don't need lectures on physicality, they need protection. And as the finals approach, one truth remains: the WNBA's reputation won't be decided by who lifts the trophy, but by whether its leadership proves strong enough to protect the game.